Go ahead.
Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, who lost Iran in 1979, there was a moment when the army said, we will take over, you've kicked out the Shah, we will have stability in Iran. And Jimmy Carter and Andrew Young, who called him a prince, said, no, we want Khomeini. They brought in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Jimmy Carter went on for 30 years, speaking abroad, always against the United States, violating all protocols, A, of being a good American, and B, certainly of being an ex-president. It was, unfortunately, Mr. Obama, Senator Obama, who put as one of his senior advisors the architect of Jimmy Carter's horrible foreign policy, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski has endorsed Jimmy Carter's book and Walt and Mearsheimer's book on the Israel lobby. This is what's happening to the Democratic Party. He is not even considered a far-left anti-Israel Democrat. He's considered a mainstream Democrat. I have not heard Hillary Clinton rebuke Jimmy Carter. He is still the chairman of Democrats Abroad, which is an important honorific title. He's still campaigning all over the country, going district by district for Democrats. He gets big audiences on campuses, and I don't hear the Democrats rebuking Jimmy Carter. On the question of Ann Coulter, not my favorite. She's not an elected Republican. She doesn't speak for the Republican Party. She's a satirist, and at times I'm very frustrated with her point of view. As it happens, if you break down what she said, which I did not like, the example she used when she was asked who would be the best Democrat and who would be the best Republican, the best Democrat, she said, would be Joe Lieberman, a Jewish American, and the best Republican would be, in fact, Duncan Hunter, who spent years as chairman of the Armed Services Committee helping Israel build its missile defense program. Then she said, Jews all go to heaven. She's not my favorite, but to try to compare Jimmy Carter to Ann Coulter is a big mistake. Why? One of them loves Israel and one of them doesn't.
Andrew.
Well, you know, it's funny you should bring up a couple of these here. Why is Iran as powerful as it is today? And the reason is because of Iraq. The reason has been that because there were two or three groups which were counterweights to Iran, and they're all gone. So the very people who you say right now have been pro-Israel and have been anti-Iran have actually been the people who are responsible for making Iran as powerful as it is today. I would also point out, and since we're talking about some of these presidential candidates, let's talk for a moment about Rudy Giuliani, who took money from the Saudis and from Hugo Chavez to represent and lobby on their behalf in the United States through Citgo. Let's talk for a minute about Fred Thompson, who chose Spencer Abraham, who was defeated by Debbie Stabenow, a Jewish senator from Michigan, who had a horrible anti-Israel record, and chosen him as his chair. And Brent Scowcroft, who was part of the who was one of McCain's top foreign policy advisors and served very close with Jim Baker, who in the previous Bush administration could hardly be described as being pro-Israel. I will also talk a little bit about Joe Lieberman. I used to go to services with Joe Lieberman in Washington, D.C. And personally, I find him one of the nicest people I've ever met in politics. But over time, his politics, not just internationally, but domestically, have drifted. He was one of the chief opponents back in the 90s of the Defense of Marriage Act, and he very passionately got up and spoke against discriminating against people based on their sexual orientation. But now, with ENDA coming up, we're going to see where he really stands. Several other times he's had the chance to take positions that were progressive. It isn't just Iraq and what's going on abroad that makes progressives upset with Joe Lieberman. He stood by the credit card companies with the bankruptcy reform, and over again he's voted with more domestically socially conservative elements. And I'll say one last thing with regards to Duncan Hunter, which was just brought up. When Jewish Air Force cadets were being forcibly proselytized too, there was a defense authorization bill which contained protections for those Jewish Air Force cadets, and it was Duncan Hunter who stripped them out at the request of evangelicals. This man has not been a friend to the Jewish community as a whole. While he may have done some good things to Israel, he and other folks, when it came time to stand up for Jews in this country, came up sorely lacking. I don't think he's a good example at all.
For Larry, why do the Republicans seem to have a soft spot in their heart for Saudi Arabia? Would you agree that Saudi Arabia is a sponsor of terrorism and an enemy of Israel and should not be considered a friend of the United States?
Daniel Pipes wrote a powerful article called The Lesser of Two Evils, where he tried to explain that there are regimes like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia which are very bad. The Wahhabism that comes out of Saudi Arabia is one of the three pivot points of jihad. The others are the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt and the Shiites out of Iran. And his conclusion was, better the devil we know than Al-Qaeda and those who attacked us on 9/11 taking over Saudi Arabia and the oil fields. So it's a very problematic relationship. We removed our base from Saudi Arabia, our $15 billion base. The president has been much tougher on the Saudis than Republican or Democratic presidents since. You all know how that relationship with the Saudis began, right? In particular regarding the oil. After World War II, President Roosevelt went on a ship with King Ibn Saud and he cut the deal that the Saudis would be exempted and accepted from the wave of liberty and democracy and capitalism around the world. We would get their oil and we would leave the 7,000 princes alone. And Aramco cut its deal and the flow of oil continued with a West that was growing very rapidly with industrialization after World War II. It's been a very bad bet. You remember in his State of the Union when the president named countries, and he said specifically Egypt and Saudi Arabia have been a major problem with the madrasas and the funding and the deal that the princes cut with the clerics inside Saudi Arabia to allow them to create this jihad. It's a very difficult, very bad scenario in Saudi Arabia, and we're stuck because we don't want the Saudi government to fall and have Al-Qaeda take over.
I think they're probably talking about, I mentioned earlier, Rudy Giuliani's firm represented Saudi Arabia in several lobbying and legal proceedings here in the United States. I think that speaks to itself that Republicans as a whole, while they may be willing to talk tough, they've had a very difficult time in terms of following up with the actions. Several years ago, I talked about how that the Republican leadership tried to expand aid to Saudi Arabia without talking to Israel, and it was only when they got turned back by the Democrats that they actually learned the lesson of asking this time. But I think that it shows, I think, an unrealistic foreign policy expectation that they've put forward. We have to take on Saudi Arabia as both a friend but also pressure them and, to make sure that they stop teaching their children anti-Semitic messages and that they start treating their women with respect, etc. And it takes that kind of interaction back and forth. And I think overall this administration, and you're not going to hear me say this very often, but I think that the way that they've dealt with the Saudis has overall been a positive thing, because on one hand, as Larry pointed out, it is the lesser of other evils. I think they can do a little better, but they at least have tried to put pressure on Saudi Arabia to stop funding, to stop using these charities as fronts to support terrorist groups, etc. But it's that same approach in a way that Obama is being criticized for in wanting to talk to Iran, not give them their way, but at least be able to have the discussions. And I would also point out that while this administration is condemning people for wanting to talk to Syria and Iran, this administration is talking to Syria and Iran through back channels. So again, the actions aren't matching up. They really don't want people to talk with them and make it like high school with, I don't like you, so I'm not going to talk with you till you see the world my way. They can try, but that's not how the world has ever worked. That's how we've gotten North Korea in line, is we talk directly with North Korea and with other countries. And we've gotten a lot farther with that than we did under this administration's previous approach, which is the same one they've been using with the other countries in the Middle East. I'm not just not going to talk to you. Well, they're going to keep doing what